All right, the unsealed indictment of Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, PD, and Love, which I'm not going to say probably for the rest of the recording. And I will probably abbreviate or leave out some of the penal codes and US codes and so on. So here we go. Count 1 is racketeering conspiracy. The grand jury charges, for decades, Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, PD, and Love, the defendant, abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on employees, resources, and the influence of multifaceted business empires that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Sean Combs, the defendant, operated his business, headquartered at various times in Manhattan and Los Angeles, under a variety of U.S.-based corporate entities, including Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprise, and Combs Global, collectively the Combs Business. Corporate entities in the Combs business included, among other things, record labels, a recording studio, an apparel line, an alcoholic spirits business, a marketing agency, and a television network and media company. At all times relevant to this indictment, Sean Combs engaged in and persisted in pervasive pattern of abuse towards women and other individuals. This abuse was at times verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual. As part of his abuse, Combs manipulated women to participate in highly orchestrated performances of sex activity with male commercial sex workers. All right, had to answer a call. My apologies if I'm reading this sentence again. As part of his pattern of abuse, Combs manipulated women to participate in highly orchestrated performances of sexual activities with male commercial sex workers. At times, he and others acting at his direction made arrangements for women and commercial sex workers to fly to Combs' location. Combs ensured participation from the women by, among other things, obtaining and distributing narcotics to them, controlling their careers, leveraging his financial support, and threatening to cut off the same, including intimidation and violence. Physical abuse by Sean Combs, the defendant, was recurrent and widely known. On numerous occasions from at least or in or about 2009 and continuing for years, Combs assaulted women by, among other things, striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects at, and kicking them. These assaults were at times witnessed by others and included one instance at a LA hotel in or about March of 2016, in which was captured on video and later publicly reported, where he kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a woman as she was attempting to leave. When a member of the hotel security staff intervened, Combs attempted to bribe the staff in order to ensure silence. Combs' violence was not limited to these women. It extended to his employees, witnesses to his abuse, and others. Sean Combs, the defendant, used the Combs business, including certain employees, to carry out, facilitate, cover up his sex abuse and commercial sex. Those employees included security and household staff, personal assistants, and high-ranking supervisors, and others close acted as Combs' intermediaries, and their conduct was facilitated and assisted by Combs' control of the business. The Combs Enterprise. From at least in or about 2008 through on or about the date of the filing of this indictment, Sean Combs, the defendant, and others known and unknown were members and associates of a criminal organization, the Combs Enterprise or Enterprise. Members and associates of the Combs Enterprise engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other activities, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for the purposes of prostitution, coercion and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The Combs Enterprise, including its leadership, its members, and its associates, constituted an enterprise as defined by Title 18 U.S. Code 1961, that is, a group of individuals associated in fact, although not a legal entity. The Combs enterprise consisted of Sean Combs, the defendant, entities within the Combs business, including but not limited to Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global, individuals employed by and associated with the Combs business, and others known and unknown. The Combs enterprise constituted an ongoing organization whose members functioned as a continuing unit for the common purpose of achieving the objectives of the enterprise. The enterprise was engaged in, and its activities affected, interstate and foreign commerce. The enterprise operated in the SDNY and elsewhere. At times relevant to this indictment, Sean Combs, the defendant, was the leader of the enterprise. Sean Combs, the defendant, and others known and unknown, participated in unlawful and other activities related to the conduct of the Combs Enterprises affairs. These individuals included certain Combs business employees, such as members of Combs security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and high-ranking supervisors, as well as other close associates of Combs. Purposes of Combs enterprise included the following: operating a global business in the media, entertainment, and lifestyle industries, including, among other things, record labels, a recording studio, an apparel line, an alcoholic spirits business, marketing agency, and a TV network and media company. Preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power, reputation, and brand of Sean Combs, the defendant, as a musician, entrepreneur, and figure in the entertainment industry. Enriching members and associates of the enterprise, including its leader, Combs, and in particular those who demonstrated loyalty to Combs and willingness to conceal his crimes. Preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power of Combs enterprise, including the power of its leader, Combs, through violence, use of firearms, threats of violence, coercion, and verbal, emotional, and physical and sexual abuse. Fulfilling the personal desires of Combs, particularly those related to Combs' sexual gratification, including the exploitation of women and use of commercial sex workers. Enabling Combs and other members and associates of the enterprise to engage in unlawful acts of violence, including sexual violence, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion, and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics distribution, and other crimes, and concealment of commission of such crimes. Securing loyalty from members of the Combs enterprise, including through acts of violence and threats, and protecting the enterprise and its members and associates, including Combs, from detection and prosecution by law enforcement authorities through acts of intimidation, manipulation, bribery, and threats of retaliation against individuals who witnessed the crimes committed by members and associates of the enterprise. Among the means and methods in which Sean Combs, the defendant, and other members and associates of the enterprise conducted and participated in the conduct of the affairs of the enterprise included the following. Combs and other members and associates of the enterprise wielded the power and prestige of Combs' role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs' orbit, often under the pretense of romantic relationship. Combs then used threats of force and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male sex workers that Combs referred to, among other things, as, quote, freak-offs. Freak-offs were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. In arranging these freak-offs, Combs, with the assistance of members and associates of the enterprise, transported and caused to be transported commercial sex workers across state lines and internationally. Freak-offs regularly occurred, sometimes lasting multiple days, and often involved multiple commercial sex workers. During freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to victims, in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of victims engaged in sex acts with commercial sex workers. After freak-offs, Combs and the victims typically received IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security and household staff, personal assistants, and other Combs business employees, facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, and lighting, cleaning the hotel rooms after the freak-offs to try to mitigate room damage, arranging for travel for victims, commercial sex workers, and Combs, to and from freak-offs, resupplying Combs with requested supplies, delivering large sums of cash to Combs to pay for commercial sex workers, and scheduling the delivery of IV fluids. In or about March of 24, during searches of Combs' residences in Miami and Los Angeles, law enforcement seized the various freak-off supplies, including narcotics and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. Combs subjected victims to personal, emotional, and verbal abuse to cause the victims to engage in freak-offs. Combs maintained control over his victims through, among other things, physical violence, promises of career opportunities, granting and threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive measures, including tracking their whereabouts, dictating the victim's appearance, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying them with controlled substances. During and separate from freak-offs, Combs, among other things, hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair. These assaults often resulted in injuries that took days or weeks to heal. Combs also threatened victims' careers and livelihood, including if they resisted participating in freak-offs. Victims believed they could not refuse Combs' demand without risking financial or job security or without repercussions in the form of physical or emotional abuse. Combs also used the sensitive, embarrassing, and incriminating recordings that he made during freak-offs as collateral to ensure the continued obedience and silence of the victims. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including his security personnel, at times carried firearms. On more than one occasion, Combs himself carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten others, including victims and witnesses to his abuse. In or about October-March of 24, during searches of Combs' residences in Miami and Los Angeles, law enforcement seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, as well as a drum magazine. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise enabled Combs control over victims by following his directions regarding financial payments to victims, advancing or suppressing the victims' career opportunities, and acquiring the controlled substances Combs used to keep victims compliant. Members and associates of the Combs enterprises at times witnessed Combs' violence towards the victims or the victims' injuries caused by Combs without intervening. Instead, members and associates of the enterprise helped conceal the violence and abuse by, among other things, assisting Combs in monitoring and preventing victims from leaving locations, such as hotels or Combs' residences. These occasions included instances in which a victim was required to remain in hiding, sometimes for several days at a time, to recover from the injuries Combs inflicted without being publicly observed. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise also assisted Combs in locating and contacting victims who attempted to flee his abuse. When employees, witnesses to his abuse, or others threatened Combs' authority or reputation, Combs and members and associates of the enterprise engaged in acts of violence, threats of financial and reputational harm, and verbal abuse. These acts of violence included kidnapping and arson. In addition, on multiple occasions, Combs threw both objects and people, as well as hit, dragged, choked, and shoved others. When employees, witnesses to his abuse, or others threatened Combs' authority or reputation, Combs and members and associates of the enterprise engaged in acts of violence, threats of financial and reputational harm, and verbal abuse. These acts of violence included kidnapping and arson. In addition, on multiple occasions, he threw both objects and people, as well as dragged, choked, and shoved others. When Combs' authority or reputation was threatened by the possibility of negative publicity or legal or law enforcement action against him, including in or about late 23, following public allegation of his crimes, Combs and members and associates of the enterprise pressured victims and witnesses, including through attempted bribery, to stay silent and not report what they had experienced or knew to law enforcement. On phone calls, Combs and other members and associates of the enterprise, among other things, provided these victims and witnesses with a false narrative of events in an effort to conceal his crimes. Combs calls caused these calls to be recorded on at least 2 occasions. From at least in or about 2008 through on or about the day of the filing of this indictment, the SDNY and elsewhere, Sean Combs, the defendant, and others known and unknown, being persons employed by and associated with the Combs enterprise, as described in paragraphs 6 through 12 of this indictment, an enterprise engaged in and the activities of which affected interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly combined, conspired, confederated, and agreed together with and each other to violate the racketeering laws of the United States, to wit, Title 18 of the U.S. Code 1962C, that is, to conduct and participate directly and indirectly in the conduct of the affairs of the enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity as that term is defined in Title 18 of Sections 1961 and 1 and 5, consisting of. And here I'll probably either abbreviate or not say the California Penal Codes, but look at the screen if you want to follow along for those numbers. They consisted of A, multiple acts involving kidnapping chargeable under the following provisions of the law. California Penal Code 207, kidnapping, as well as attempt, aiding and abetting, and conspiracy. Multiple acts involving arson, chargeable under the following provisions of the law. Those are California Penal Codes related to arson, attempt, aiding and abetting, and conspiracy. Multiple acts involving bribery, chargeable under California Penal Code regarding bribery of a witness, attempt, aiding and abetting, and conspiracy. Multiple acts indictable under Title 18 of U.S. Code Section 1512. Multiple acts which are related to tampering with a witness, victim, or informant. Multiple acts indictable under Title 18 related to forced labor, related to sex trafficking, related to transportation and the inducement to travel for purposes of prostitution and other illegal sexual activities, and multiple offenses involving the possession with intent to distribute or distribution of narcotics and controlled substances. And those are listed on the page right here. In violation of Title 21, which is distribution and possession with intent to distribute, and conspiracy to do the same, as well as Section 2, aiding, abetting, and willfully causing. It was part of the conspiracy that Sean Combs, the defendant, agreed that a conspirator would commit at least 2 acts of racketeering activity in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise. From at least or in or about 2009 up to and including 2018 in the SDNY and elsewhere, as part of his agreement to conduct and participate in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity, Sean Combs, the defendant, agreed to, in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly recruit, entice, harbor, transport, provide, obtain, advertise, maintain, patronize, and solicit by any means a person knowing and in reckless disregard of the fact that means of force, threats of force, fraud, and coercion, as described in the U.S. Codes Title 18, Section 1591, E2, and any combination of such means that would be used to cause the person to engage in a commercial sex act in violation of Title 18, Section 1591A1 and B1, and Section 1962D. Count 2. Sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, victim 1. The grand jury further states, from at least or in about 2009 up to including in or about 2018 in the SDNY and elsewhere, Sean Combs, the defendant, in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, provided, obtained, advertised, maintained, patronized, and solicited by any means a person knowing in and in reckless disregard of the fact that means of force, threats of force, fraud, and coercion, and any combination of such means would be used to cause the person to engage in a commercial sex act and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the same, to which Combs recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, and maintained a person, victim 1, and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused victim 1 to engage in commercial sex acts, knowing and in reckless disregard of the fact that victim 1 was engaging in commercial sex acts as a result of force, fraud, and coercion. Count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution. The grand jury further states, from at or at least about 2009 through 2024, in the SDNY and elsewhere, Sean Combs, the defendant, knowingly transported an individual to interstate and foreign commerce with intent that the individual engage in prostitution and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the same, to wit, Combs reported, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the transportation of female victims and commercial sex workers in interstate and foreign commerce on multiple occasions with the intent that they engage in prostitution. Forfeiture allegations. As a result of committing the offense alleged in count 1 of this indictment, Sean Combs, the defendant, shall forfeit to the United States any and all interests the defendant acquired or maintained, and any and all interests, securities of, claims against, and property or contractual rights of any kind affording a source of influence over the enterprise named and described herein, which the defendant established, operated, controlled, conducted, and participated in conduct of, and any and all property constituting and derived from proceeds obtained indirectly and directly, said offense, included but not limited to the sum of money in U.S. currency representing this amount of proceeds traceable to the commission of said offense. As a result of committing the offense alleged in count 2 of this indictment, Sean Combs shall forfeit to the U.S. any and all property, real and personal, involved in, used, or intended to be used to commit or facilitate the commission of said offense, and any and all property traceable to such property, and any and all property, real or personal, constituting or derived from the proceeds obtained directly or indirectly as a result of said offense, including but not limited to a sum of money in U.S. currency representing the amount of property involved in said offense and proceeds traceable to the commission of said offense. As a result of committing the offenses in the offense alleged in count 3 of this indictment, the defendant, Sean Combs, shall forfeit to the U.S. pursuant to Title 18 any and all property, real and unreal, constituting or derived from proceeds obtained directly or indirectly as a result of said offense, and any and all property, real or personal, that was used or intended to be used to commit or facilitate the commission of said offense, and any and all property, real or unreal, that constitutes or is derived from proceeds traceable to the commission of said offense, including but not limited to a sum of money in U.S. currency representing the amount of proceeds traceable to commission of said offense. Substitute assets provision. If any of the above described forfeitable property as a result of any act or omission of the defendant cannot be located upon the exercise of due diligence, has been transferred or sold to or deposited with a third person, has been placed beyond the jurisdiction of the court, has been substantially diminished in value, has been commingled with other property which cannot be subdivided without difficulty, it is the intent of the United States to seek forfeiture of any other property of the defendant up to the value of the above forfeitable property. And that is the unsealed indictment of Sean Combs, aka Diddy.